What up? What up? It's your man Sean P coming in live. This is the Sean P Experience, the Friday night edition, man. The rare Friday evening edition. Hope you are safe where you are. Get your drinks, get your snacks, and hopefully get something to write with. There'll be a lot of gems uncovered in this show, man. I have a very, very special guest. How you doing this evening, my sister?
I'm doing good. I'm doing real good. How are you?
Yes, man. I am so just excited and honored to have you on the show. I've been seeing that book cover going around for a long time. So whenever you and I finally connected, I was so honored and excited to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So for your official introduction, today on Sigma the Griot, we are honored to welcome Moana Kai El-Jamah Bomani, a writer, playwright, and spirit woman from New Orleans, Louisiana, a generation witch and priestess of Oya. Moana is the author of Conjuring the Calabash and the Hoodoo Saints and Root Warriors, and she's the editor-in-chief of Oya in Sorrow. She's a teacher, a ritualist, and a podcast host, bringing culture, magic, and liberation into every space she touches. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm gonna just fix you a little bit. It's Mawiyah. Mawiyah.
Mawiyah.
That's okay. That's okay. That's
No,
okay.
this is good. This is good. People
Mhm.
don't realize this. When I'm prepping for the show,
Yeah.
the only thing that racked my brain the most is getting the name right.
Right. Right. Right.
So
Right.
on the
Right.
audio book, on the end credits, I play the
Uh-huh.
end credits over and over again, and
Uh-huh.
then saying the author's name. And I
Uh-huh.
tried and tried and tried, and I apologize, my sister, but
It's okay. It's okay.
we gonna make it. We gonna make
You
it.
gave it
So
love, so it's okay.
yeah. I want to ask you a question first about being a Southern writer, right?
Hmm.
So for a long time, Southern writers don't always get the respect and the honor and the reverence that they should get compared to other regions in the country.
Hmm.
Give me your understanding or perception of that stereotype, and how do you feel about it?
Well, I feel like just like with I think with music, right? When we think about hip hop and things like that, I feel like it's some of the same, energy. I think a lot of times people look at Southern writers as being kind of like backwoods. You know what I'm saying? Like what you have to say, nobody really wants to hear. They don't really give us that energy that they give other people from other areas. And so I know personally when I was in undergrad and I took a Southern literature course, we dealt with a lot of white writers, right? And oftentimes they were writing from the perspective of trying to kind of like mock the language of Black people, right? And a lot of their stories were kind of like I would consider like kind of like blackface, kind of almost, in their work. And so I think that for a lot of people, it when you think about African American Southern writers, it's kind of like shameful for them. A lot of times they look at it as being, this country, this grammar, this talk, these things that you're going to talk about that we want to move away from, right? It's just like that great migration of people, right? That migration of the mind. We don't want to deal with those issues. So if it's Southern, then it's kind of too country, right? And that's not where we want to be in the greater scheme of having our literature out there for white people to buy and look at in actuality, right? And so we run from that, right? Until we feel like we need it, until it's in, right? It's like now, you have a lot of where people are saying, oh, I know I have that in my family. I have hoodoo. I have this. We did that. I'm Geechee or whatever they want to call it. And now they want to gravitate towards it, because it's in. But yeah, that whole idea of, you're just too kind of like almost they write it off as though you're ignorant. You're going to be embarrassing us in front of white company, So yeah.
And what do you think that us Southern writers bring unique to the writing space and storytelling that they can't even duplicate that in other places? What do we bring unique to the table?
I think we bring an understanding of history. We're still connected to a lot of the cultural nuances, right? Of our family, our relatives. A lot of those same ideas they were passed down. We're still a lot of us are still in the South in those areas where our grandparents grew up and everybody grew up. So a lot of that energy, those stories that they tell you, things that they tell you don't do. When I was growing up, it's like you're getting your hair done in the kitchen, by your mom, your grandmother. Everybody's in there there, and they're like, when you know some hair comes out, you know, you don't just toss it out in the trash. You know, you learn that, right? You burn that. You know, bird can make a nest of drive you nuts, you know, and things like that. So you still have that connection to those stories and that history that's part of our DNA. And I think for us still being here, we don't really run from that. So we use it, whether it's in our music, whether it's in our literature, whatever it is, you know, how we dress, how we talk, we still cling to that, you know, here in the South. And so for those of us who stayed and that energy that stayed, you know, we allow that to sort of, you know, move our work.
I think that perception is so sad because a lot of the National Book of the Year award writers and a lot of the
Yes,
Oprah Winfrey book picks, a lot of
yes,
the Pulitzer Prize winning writers
yes.
for a while now, it's been Southern
Yeah,
based writers. Clinton
yeah.
Smith, New York Clinton Smith, Dr.
Hmm.
Imani Perry, Jesmyn Ward,
Hmm.
Eddie Glaude. You
Hmm.
can go on, Kiese.
Right, right,
They're
right.
all,
That's the
yeah.
flavor. That's where the flavor is, right? And you notice, you know, when people want to go back and they want to make their writing more interesting, they try to pull from those stories, right? They try to remember the story that they heard from, you know, the great grandmother or whatever. They try to go back and find historical records of enslavement and how they family members, you know, traverse that type of energy. But you know, it's who we are, right? And it's a part of us, so it should still be a part of our work. And that's what I've always found for myself, that those stories, you know, when I sit with my ancestors and I talk to my grandfather and I sit at my shrine, I want to hear those stories, right? I want that energy because I know that we live in a place that is still, you know, heavily inundated with a lot of the same energy that they were dealing with. Might be different looks, different types of people, and different things that are going on, but it's still that same energy. America is still a dirty, rotten place as it's ever been. Right. I remember growing up and coming home from school, and we had these the ebony like history books, ebony, you know, the hardback ones, right? And I remember my mom,
Hey, I have some of those.
yes,
I
yes, I
have
still
some of those.
have them. And my
I have
mom
some.
would flip, and she would say, you know, you go to the page with you actually saw Emmett Till in his casket, right? And then she would say, and flip to the page where you saw the church for the bombing of the girls, right? And remember, she wanted us to remember, my brother, my sister, and myself, you know, to remember that every time you leave this house, this is still America. This is still where you are. Right. And so no matter how good things get, you're not supposed to just move away from having joy in your life, but you still have to remember where you are. Right. And you still and in remembering, you're always ready. You're protected. Now you have your armor, you know. And so for me, I just feel like in my writing, I always remember that. There's always a nugget of something in there that's going to remind us. It's not to drag us down, to make us feel sad, but we have to honor that. We have to know what's going on and see the repeating cycle, right?
Well, you just said that, man. It just jogged my memory so strong about the past few months. The amount of lynchings that we're seeing
Yeah,
left and right.
yeah,
Mississippi had 2, 3 in the same week.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
This other place, like the amount,
Right,
and it's not talked
right.
about enough in mainstream media.
Not talked about enough. It's not
It's
talked.
not talked about enough in mainstream.
In that book, 100 Years of Lynching, right? My grandfather used to say he knew 7 guys in there. That was 7 too many. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, so yeah, and you know, we're still seeing this cycle. You know, so we can't run from it. And you know, for a lot of people, I think I talked to a lot of people, and they were like, "Well, we thought that was just a Southern thing." You know, until this young woman, this sister, she's a professor right up north, and she said I came back from a lunch break, right, going back to her class, and there was a noose on her doorknob, you know. And so she's like, I couldn't believe it, is what she told me. I couldn't believe it, you know. And I say, yeah, you know, and now it's everywhere, it's the South, right? You know what I'm saying? So there's no escaping it, right? You know, so how are we going to deal with that? Yeah. And so for me, it's about, you know, you got to be weaponed up, whatever weapons you're using, but your spirituality has to also become a weapon for you. You know, it's not, we can't sit back and say, we're going to pray for them and then they're going to get theirs later. Cause I'm catching hell now. You know what I'm saying? I might not see when you get yours, but you know, if you bring it to me, then I should be able to bring it to you. So that's my belief.
Thank you very, very much for that, man. About my next question for a little softball question, man. Here in Louisiana, is an age-old debate about where's the best food. Now, when I have my fellow Louisiana guests on the show, I love to ask, where is the actual best food in Louisiana? Is it actually New Orleans or is it in another zip code? Is how I put the question.
All right, now you're not about to make me mess up New Orleans. All right, so I'm going with New Orleans all day. You're not about to do that to me. You're not all
Oh, come
look,
on, sis. Come on, sis.
all day. Look, but
It's,
I'm just gonna give it like this. In the South, we better than in the North, right? We got the South. We got all the flavors down in the South. Okay, so after Katrina, we our kids were young, so we moved up to the northern part of Louisiana, Shreveport, right, which is where I am now. But my husband and I are born and raised from New Orleans. He's from Ninth Ward. I'm from Uptown New Orleans. So people always say, we got crawfish, we got this, we got that. And we're like, I don't know about that. Because up here, they pour the season on top of the crawfish. We're like, no, you got to boil that. That's not how you do that. So, yeah. So I'm just going to say the South wins.
they always say that northern Louisiana pretty much like Mississippi or something like that. Like it's not
Right,
really
right, right,
Louisiana.
right,
Toward
right, right.
Alexandria, Shreveport,
Yeah,
toward that
yeah,
way. Like,
yeah.
like they ain't the real Louisiana.
They don't believe in them seasonings, man.
But you mentioned you and your husband being from the Uptown and the Ninth Ward. So the
Yes.
cash money no limit versus who are you going for?
Cash
I'm talking
money.
cash
Cash
money
money all day.
for the 99 to 2000.
For the 99 to 2000s, just right. Because actually, where my mom, where we live, well, we lived on Jenna, then we moved to Upper Line area, and that was in that Valence area where they were. So, where BG and all them. So yeah. So
I had to ask, right?
you
So,
yeah,
to the actual book, right? The actual book, Hoodoo Saints and Root Warriors.
yeah, yeah.
For the audience to understand, yes, that beautiful, beautiful cover. For the audience to understand, I love breaking things down. What does it truly mean to be a witch
Okay,
versus the perception that people have from, of
yeah.
course, the
Well,
supposed Halloween
yeah,
tradition and the movies and the books? What's a
right,
real
right,
witch?
right. For me, using the term is always about going against what we've always been taught, right? So if you look at it, if you study the term itself, it was always applied to women who lived outside of what society thought that they should be doing, right? These were women who were, taking care of the home, but also taking care of nurturing other women. They were the ones who were making sure that the babies survived, right? They were the midwives, right? They were the medicine women when they were the doctors. So in the earliest days, women were doing these jobs. And it was seen when it was looked upon, especially in Europe, right? When women had all of this power, right? And the men felt like, okay, they're getting a little bit too powerful. We need to say that that shouldn't be a job for them. So that should be a job for men, right? The doctors and all of these things that they're doing. The knowledge of herbs, that should be a school thing, something you learn in school as a male, right? And so the idea came to be called to say that if a woman practiced these things or did these things, she was demonized as a witch, right? And so for me, oftentimes when I use that term, it's about just reclaiming the energy of the fact that I live outside the margins, right? In terms of helping people. I worked a lot of times with sisters who may have lost their babies, right? Whether it's stillborn or whatever, miscarriage, right? And so in helping them with death, right? That is something they're the coping with it, the coping mechanism of it. There was a sister that I worked with, and this was because all the medical issues that Black women are having, right? So she went to the hospital and she just didn't feel good. She was like 6 months pregnant, right? And they told her that the baby was not alive, but that she needed to go home and they would deal with it in 2 days, right? Who says that, right? And so part of it was talking to her in terms of helping her to emotionally ground herself, right? But also to be able to say goodbye to this child, right? This energy that they're not even recognizing as anything, because we'll deal with it later, So, and you think about it in times past, that would have been considered witchcraft, right? To help somebody deal with that type of issue. So for me, saying witch, it just opens it up to an area where I say that I'm doing things that nobody else would want to do, right? Or going to, even think about doing unless they're going to charge you a whole bunch of money. And I'm doing it for nothing because I love her, because I love people, right? And I want to see us survive. You know what I'm saying? So it's just about working outside of the margins and reclaiming these paths, midwives and death doulas and things like that, that nobody else would want to do unless they can put a label on it and sell it back to us, which is what white people do, right? They want to sell everything that we've always known. They want to give it back to us. And so I run into that a lot when I talk about hoodoo. And white people say, well, why can't I do it? Why is it closed off? Why are you saying that's my white people voice? Why are you saying that? And I go, because hoodoo itself, from its very creation, was about subjugation, people who were subjugated, right? You had all of these different people, this energy from these different tribal areas in Africa, right? All these different communities of people, but whether they were brought to this place we call the New World, or they were brought to the Caribbean or wherever they went, and then they came back here, but they brought all of their knowledge with them, right? And so in this new place, now we have to get these herbs and figure out how we're going to manifest this as part of our magic, our spirituality. And so how are we going to survive? Because nobody's looking after us. There's no doctor for us. There's no mental health for you being enslaved, so how do we handle that? So hoodoo was born out of that. It was a way to fight. It was a way to protect. It was a way to ensure that we stayed safe, right? Mentally, physically, and all of those things. And so it's, to me, witchcraft, whatever you want to label it, is about, honoring all those things, saying, okay, guess what? I know it's not what you want me to do, but it's what I'm going to do, right? And so you just have to deal with it. You either deal with the terms or not, so that's what, how I've always looked at it, because, in the sense, it's always been women who have worked outside of the margins, and only because, the male energy, the energy in Europe, the white men wanted to take it, right? We want this. You got too much power, because from out of the idea of claiming that term for them, right? They also decided much later that we need to take their property as well. Women could own property. Women didn't have to have the last name of their husbands. All of this became an idea about how I can be above you. So if you look at white men doing that to white women, you can see clearly how that would fit into our enslavement, right? So if we can do it to them, we can just do it to other groups of people. So yeah.
Thank you very, very much for that. I was going to ask this question later, but you kind of brought it to the forefront. When it comes to your actual clients and real cases, as a writer, what was that creative choice like to decide, like, almost every chapter in the book, you have a real actual a scenario where a
Mhm.
client actually used this principle to
Yeah.
help them all
Yeah.
throughout the book.
Yeah.
Tell about that choice.
So I always ask people, I always ask, is it okay, to use? Because I use a lot of testimonials and when I do workshops and stuff like that as well. So for me, it was always about, first of all, deciding what individuals I were going to use to start off the chapters, like the saints, the individuals that are historical people, right? So that came from divination, right? Sitting and divining. Part of my background is in Ifa, the Yoruba culture, right? Naturally, being from New Orleans, Vodun plays a big heavy part in that, right? So it was about divining first, making a list. There are people that I like, right, who I didn't use for this book because I used them during workshops, right? So divination first, and then from that, kind of figuring out what client scenarios would fit into exactly what the chapter was about, and then approaching those people, and saying, hey, I'm going to change the names and all that. Would you mind? Because I think that other people could benefit from this type of healing, and so, and I never got to know, people were clear with that, because for a lot of people, and I started getting a lot more client work during the pandemic, like we were talking about before the show started, like during the pandemic. And so for me, there were people who were practitioners of Yoruba culture, other things like that. But then there were a lot of people who were going to church, Baptist church, Catholic church, whatever. They were like, look, I need some help. And such told me about you and this and that. And I would tell them, in lieu of paying money, this is what I want you to do. Buy some extra canned goods when you go out. Leave them on your neighbor's porch, right? Get some coats, get some backpacks with some, put some school supplies in it and leave that for somebody at the nearest school near you. And so for a lot of people, they had never thought about that in terms of how you pay back for spirituality, how you give back. because the church, they were saying that, I mean, my preacher want the money. You sure you don't want, and I would say, no, let's do this, because this builds our community. Because for me, it's not just about helping you heal, spiritually, but it's about how we can also create this barrier of comfort for our community. Right. And so I would always tell people to do that. And so I got a lot more people coming in, a lot more people asking about assistance and work. And so, in lieu of that, I want people to know that, hoodoo, root work, whatever, if you're a practitioner of anything, you should always be about how you're going to nurture your community. The money shouldn't just be about, filling your pockets, lining your pockets, getting a fancy car and all this foolishness. It should be about how you're going to heal your community. Now, if you can't do that, then you don't need to be leading anybody, doing anything for anybody, anywhere. So, yeah.
And how do you balance teaching, storytelling, and protecting the people involved? Because there is a level of
Yeah.
course, like you said, confidentiality, protection,
Yeah.
and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
How do you find that balance in that?
Yeah. For me, I have a website. So people usually hit me up through my website and they'll say like what they need. And then that'll go straight to my email. And so what I usually do is, I'll check it like twice a week, right? But I'm trying to write every day. So I try to put in, 2 to 3 hours every day to try to write, writing something. And that's my writing time. And nothing, comes in between that time. You know what I'm saying? And, and then I'll go back, and usually on the weekends, I'm doing client work and stuff like that. I have a much longer time to look at it. And I tell people, I let them know straight up, I'll hit them back in the email and say, I got your email, I'll look at this over the weekend. And I'm one, if I feel like your situation, I know a lot of other really good people who do this work as well. And I'll say, okay, I'm going to refer you to this person. I never refer people to somebody who I know is, janky, who ain't doing nothing right. So I'll tell them, I'm going to refer you to this person. And that's the way it goes. Because I feel like, as a community, if we're healing, it ain't all about me. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, right. So, I'm clear on referring people, but I try to write every day, definitely every day, even if it's, just on a notepad, stickies. I got stickies all over the place. If I get an idea, even finishing up this book, I was already working on something for children, so it was something I talked about my agent about, and then we were kind of like bouncing it back and forth, thinking, well, I think that this will be better as a middle grade, sort of a novel for young people that really brings in the idea of our culture, our background. So it stems from, it's in the Southern Louisiana region, and it's got, some hip hop in it. It's got, children finding out about magic, but it's introducing them in a way that they're not ashamed of their culture and their history, right? So that's what I'm working on now. But like you say, it's a balance. It really is. But for me, it's about just letting people know straight up, because I'm working on this, but I got you, I heard you, and I'll get back to you. And sometimes there are some individuals who are really really pressing with things, like I said about, if their sister who's having a hard time with the relationship, or brother who's having whatever he's dealing with, relationship issues, I'll try to get to them and do sort of like a mini reading, right? And I'll say, okay, we can get to the larger part of this later, but this is kind of like a little band-aid for right now, right? So yeah.
So I know clearly from your work, you got to be big on rituals. You're big on certain things. So do you have a writing ritual? Is my question. Is there
Yeah.
something you do before you're writing, or set the scene, or the atmosphere, or anything like that?
Yeah, usually for me, it's whatever, incense pool I like the smell of. I might, put that down first, right? And then I might stop at my grandfather. I keep my grandfather's picture near, where I am, because he's a masterful storyteller, right? So I'm usually there, and I sit a little bit, and I may drink some coffee with him or something like that. Just kind of sit and think, and oftentimes different ideas will come in. If I'm kind of like stuck on how I want this scene to go, I can sit and meditate with him, and then that usually helps with the flow. So it's usually just that incense, maybe getting something to drink, and the picture of my grandfather stays handy right there. So that's what I do. Mm-hmm.
So this show is called Sitting with the Griots. And most times the opening question is, how do you feel about being called a modern griot, being a storyteller? And you come from an actual long line of
Mm-hmm.
tradition of storytelling. How do
Yeah.
you feel wearing that moniker now? Do you feel any kind of pressure or a weight to carry that kind of a title?
No, I don't feel any pressure. I actually like it because I think that for a lot of, especially for a lot of younger people, it allows them to see the value in storytelling, right? The value in being able to, because I teach too, right? So teaching elementary school, I've taught high school, and so you really want to be able to stretch out a story. Is what and I always tell kids that, because a lot of times even teaching, I was working with some fifth graders, and they were learning how to write narratives, right? And so it was kind of like, I did this, I did that, and three sentences, and they were like, I was like, no, we got to stretch it out. We got to stretch it out. Each line, each scene, you want to make it, you want to make me feel like I was there. So yeah, it's like, for me, I think that the more they learn how to do that, they start to see the value in storytelling. So being called a griot is a great thing, because I feel like it allows me to help other individuals really see, whether they're younger or older, just to evaluate it. I think we lost a lot of that, especially with social media, because we're so quick to just, type a certain thing, or cut down the language, LOL, instead of just actually ha ha ha, whatever you want to say, so we've lost those steps in how to actually talk to each other, communicate with a story. We watch a lot of TikTok and videos, and we don't tell the story that goes with it, right? And so oftentimes we just we quick speak, or we don't speak, or I find a lot of younger people, they don't even know how to hold a conversation, right? It really, they don't know how to hold a conversation. Yes, no, short answers. Yeah. How was your day? It was good. They mumble rap, right? They're like mumbling, the whole thing. And so how do we change that, right? And things like debate, things like speech classes, things like that, where you forced to actually talk, and have something to say. Well, no, that's not enough. And so I tell the kids I teach, that's not enough. Talk about it. Make me feel like it. I don't believe your story. Make me believe it. And so then they start to talk more and have more to say. So yeah, being called a griot to me, it allows me to feel like I'm actually helping people see the value in storytelling and how to create stories.
When you said that, made me think about at my job, a lot of my coworkers are in their early 20s, or they just
Uh-huh.
graduated high school. And
Uh-huh.
even my own children are in their early 20s,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
like, if I type in a text to them, it's a full thought.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
always like, why are you saying so much in the text?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they would take
Yeah.
that same paragraph and make 5 different texts instead of just
Right. Right.
saying the
Right.
complete thought. And
Right.
it's like,
Right.
what?
Somebody there was this it was like a little meme somebody put up, and they had, like, back in our day, the text was like the back of an envelope, and your mom wrote all these things on it that you better do before she get home, versus today, right? And the whole envelope was written all up. Yeah. And so yeah, exactly. And I have, my kids are, older too, like in the 20s and stuff like that. And so it's the same thing. And it's kind of like, the conversations don't go anywhere, or it's what they've seen on the internet, right? That becomes their point of view. And you're like, no, well, what do you really think? What's your point of view? Not what you heard somebody else say. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to know what Stephen A. Smith said. I want to know what you feel. What do you think? So yeah, I think that is part, like we were talking about earlier, in the South. That's where we differ. I think a lot of us, we still have that ability to tell those stories, right? Those stories are still resonate with us. They're still fresh with us. And so we didn't really move away from that. We hear those stories, and even with our kids, you tell them. I'm sure you tell your kid, and it's like, oh yeah, they hear it, but they know those stories. They know them. They know them. When the time comes, they're gonna use those same stories, and we're gonna be looking like, what? But I think, because we didn't run from that, because we're still part of the grain of the Southern culture, that we're griots. That's what we are. There's no way to get away from it. We are.
And I can't speak on other regions of the country like too thoroughly. I've lived other places, but I can't
Yeah.
speak on what it's like growing up there. But I know in the South, we are still so close to our grandparents most times.
Yes.
Like my
Yes.
grandparents played a large part in my
Yes.
upbringing. So of course,
Yeah.
they're storytelling all day.
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
you around older folks on the phone talking for hours on end. I'm around my grandfather in the barbershop with his older friends
Yes.
talking about.
Yes.
So you're
Yeah.
hearing long form storytelling all the time.
Yes, all the time, all the time. So there's no way that it can't impact your writing, right? So it becomes a part of how we write. And it's important because we want the writing to live. right? We wanted to have its longevity long past our lives. So, keeping those stories going. And that was a part of the reason why I wrote the book and included a lot of historical reference, because for a lot of people, the Ninth Ward has taken on its own different, look now. Right. But we still want to honor and remember people like Mother Catherine Seals. Right. We want to understand this woman who, did all of this work when in a time where, because she went to see a faith healer, and this white guy's like, I don't do black people. I don't heal black people. You know what I'm saying? So this woman created her own situation where she could have healing for black people, right? And then still allowed white people to come in, but you sitting in the back because that's how y'all do us. You know what I'm saying? You get to the back, so, and then to still be in communion with people like Zora Neale Hurston, who went there, right, and understood. And so for me, I look at it like when somebody say Griot, I look at like people like Zora Neale Hurston. I'm in that kind of company, and I like being in that kind of company because those are the storytellers and the people who crafted all of this so that we could still have it, because it's part of our survival. We let it go, and that means that we're trying too hard to be European, and we're never going to be European. We're never going to be that. So yeah.
What is it about the city of New Orleans where it's synonymous with mystery, spirituality, hoodoo, the voodoo, even when it comes to ghosts and things? There's something about the city of New Orleans is always this power center of that. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think because it's a port city, right? And I think because, when a lot of the enslaved people were brought in, right? They were brought in through the city, the auctions and all of that took place in that area. But then you also had, you had this French and you had the Spanish influences, and you had a lot of freedoms for people of color there, black people there, in terms of, you could go ahead and do your thing on that day. And then this person, then you go back to the plantation or whatever you were doing. So there was still a lot of African retention that wasn't stamped out in the area, right? So people like Marie Laveau could have these, could have her meetups, right? And nobody bothered that, because they understood that the people who were free were going to be there. The enslaved people, some of them were going to be there, then they were going to go back to where they needed to go, right? And so I think a lot of the less, just all on top of people and the enforcement of laws, really was let up in that region because of all of these different types of people, the French and the Spanish, and the idea of, okay, we'll let them do this, they can do that, it's okay, it's not problematic. But in a sense, it really is, right? Because you're empowering people by letting them keep their spirituality. And that's what happened in Haiti, right? The empowerment of the spirituality. Much later, right, folks started to see that is an issue. That is a problem, right? But by then it was much too late, right? So I think that because of the port city, because of the fact that a lot of the African retention was still allowed to exist, there is a lot of mystery in that. I think that a lot of the white people wanted to demonize it, right? So in the sense of demonizing it, then you start to make everything like it's evil, right? And when Marie Laveau was she was part of a prison ministry. She was helping people. She was helping enslaved people find freedom. She was helping Native people. So she was doing all of these things, but we demonize her and we say, oh, voodoo. Oh, she was this and she was that. She took all of this money that she made off of them white folk, and she was helping these black people. She was, in making sure that people were educated, doing all this stuff. And so one of the first times that I heard about her, I was at Catholic school in New Orleans, right? And the priest there, Bishop Perry, talked about the fact that she should be considered a saint. We're like, whoa, you know what I'm saying? And he said, we have all of these images of white saints, and the stained glass and all of this. But here's this woman who did all of these, fixing gumbo for prisoners and, going to the courtroom. Somebody say my child is unjustly, going to be sentenced. And she would do all of these rituals to make sure that didn't happen. I mean, so she was as much, this activist as anything else, but we don't hear those stories, right? We hear the ghost stories and why you should be afraid of her and all of this stuff about voodoo. And when actuality, what it was an activism practice, right? It was about remembering where we came from. And so when people don't want us to remember, they demonize everything that makes us remember. Don't do that. Do what I tell you to do. Because as long as you're doing what I tell you to do, you have no fight. You're just going to pray for me. And that's not no fight. You know what I'm saying? Just you getting on your knees praying, and I'm still gonna be beating the shit out of you. There's no fight in that. Of course, why wouldn't you love that, right? So yeah.
So you've been a long time doing this work, probably your whole life, it sounds like.
Mhm, mhm.
So when a blockbuster movie like Sinners come out early in the year, and then I know on my timeline on social media, it was an explosion of people
Right, right.
talking about all of these books.
Yeah,
There are book lists going
yeah.
everywhere
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
about spirituality and our traditions, cultures, things like that, right? How did you feel whenever that explosion happened? Like, was
Right,
it a
right,
celebration moment? Like, yes,
right,
finally, or was it like,
right.
how did you feel?
Well, so the sister, the beautiful sister, who worked on the film as far as cultural, input, Yvonne Chirot is a friend of mine, right? And so probably around February, she before the movie came out, she contacted me because they were looking for somebody to work with them in terms of marketing, right? They wanted to make sure they got that right. And during that time, my mom was still, she's got kidney disease, and so she was having some issues. But I talked to Warner Brothers, right? And so they were, the ideas that they had was kind of like you know, what, this is my perception of the idea. The idea that they were telling me about was that, okay, we can fly you in and you could do this ritual thing, and we could give these bags to like the press, right? Kind of, and it's kind of like if you were having just a regular vampire movie, and you might have some caskets and maybe some steaks in a bag. And so my conversations with them was that hoodoo is a real practice, right? And so hoodoo is a living practice. And so I made them understand that it was born out of this need to protect people who were not being protected, right? Enslaved people, my ancestors, so it's not something to be treated like it's just something you could just buy and sell, right? It's not that. And so we had a couple of more conversations about it, and then finally the decision was like, okay, yeah, we understand. Because if I said to them, if you want to sell steaks like for vampires, do that. But the hoodoo aspect needs to be respected, because a lot of your fan base who are going to come out and support this movie are going to be people who are looking to understand this practice. You're going to have those people who are ready to demonize, right? Because it's titled sinners, right? And then, but you're going to also have people who practice this, who know this, who live on those fringes of culture, right? And spirituality. And so they're going to want to see the portrayal accurate, right? And so it was understood in that way that they were not going to go that route, right? And so for me, when it came out, I love the fact that it did stick to the portrayal, and and there wasn't any of this foolishness in marketing, right? So I loved it because I felt like it allowed people to really understand that this practice is a serious practice, and that it is ours, and that if we're going to protect ourselves from psychic vampires, right? People who are trying to take, because if you look at the imagery, right, and take away, just not look at it as just a horror film, right? But you look at the imagery of how white people come in and colonize and take everything, right? And just make us feel a certain way about who we are and where we come from, in that sense, and where we're just like, you know what, I'm with you. I'm moving away from this. It really did a great job to say, no, this is your culture. You fight for it. You die for it. This is yours. So yeah.
Do you think we need more writers, filmmakers, and musicians like Beyonce, for an example, to honor more the hoodoo, the Orisha, and our traditions, to keep that tradition going and make the younger generations attract to our original rituals and traditions?
If they do it in a respectful way, I believe that yeah. Some people, just like anything, they hear about something, or they see something that it looks good or it's flashy, and then they want to do it or have it. I know, like in EFI, there's this big push. A lot of people just want to wear elekes. They want the necklaces, right? The elekes, they want that, and they just think, like it's like like you're wearing a herringbone or a medallion or something. But there's not a lot of respect for what goes with that, because part of the idea about the elekes is not just to collect a neck full of jewelry. spiritual jewelry. The idea is that you learn about those orisha, right? So that there comes a day where you don't have to wear your elekes, right? That energy is within. The energy is going to soak into you. The elekes remind you of who you are and where you come from, and the energy that lives with you, right? It's not to be a fashion statement. And so I think for a lot of people, stars included, right? They see this is a new thing popping, so that's me. I'm that person. I'm doing that thing, and that leads people down a dangerous path because they don't have that understanding and knowledge to know that this is work. This is spiritual work, right? You can't just go into get initiated and think, okay, now I'm down. I don't have to do nothing else. You have to work. You have to physically get out there and do work. You have to work for your community. Just wear elekes and then that's it. You still have to get out there and be a part of your community and activist in your community as part of that energy that lives with you, that walks with you.
So in many spiritual systems, they kind of like guard the knowledge behind initiation and stuff like that. Tell me the choice you made in this book. Every chapter you give like step by step detail, like a recipe, if you will.
Right, right,
Everything you
right.
need, how you go
Yeah,
about doing
yeah,
it,
yeah,
when
yeah,
you do it. Tell me about
yeah,
the public choice of doing it that way.
yeah. Well, hoodoo for me, it's not so much about an initiated practice, right? When we think about voodoo, we think about Ifa, Palo, Mayombe, whatever those practices are, right? They do require initiation, right? Hoodoo, a lot of hoodoo practitioners can be somebody who's going to the Baptist church, the Catholic church, practice whatever they practice. But the understanding is still that, if you're grounding yourself in something that was here, right, based upon what our ancestors dealt with here, then you can pull from hoodoo. So for me, it's open to us, right? And so it wasn't hard to figure out how to do things and what to put. A lot of it was information that I've understood from growing up. So I knew that this goes with this, and that the people who need to hear it need to be reached by it. They don't understand what I'm talking about, in terms of how to get things and how to gravitate toward things. So the biggest thing I think for me in terms of situating the recipes and rituals in each section is just understanding sitting with ancestors, sitting with my shrine, my altar space, and figuring out exactly what is needed for right now. It's like when you go to church, if you go to church or if you're sitting and getting a divination from Babalawo, right, or somebody, and they're telling you information in Yoruba, in the African language, and you don't speak Yoruba, right, but you pay for this divination, you're not going to know what's going on. So you need the language to speak to you for right now. And so I wanted a book where anybody could pick it up first. They didn't need to be initiated, right? And they could just go and jump in there because these are our people. These are our people. And they could just do it, right? And if they had questions, they could ask, but a lot of it is definitely spelled out for them. And they could just utilize the information and material and didn't feel like, well, I got to wait till a teacher comes and initiate me. I didn't want that. I wanted something that we could all just dive into.
You kind of touched on it a little bit, but my next question was, what's the difference between hoodoo, the voodoo, the voodoo,
Yeah.
and voodoo? Like these different iterations that we hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
How does the layperson separate when
Yeah.
they're hearing these things?
Well, I was always taught, we say voodoo, people call it voodoo, but it's still the same thing, right? And then there's hoodoo. Voodoo and voodoo, they're initiations. It's a spiritual practice, right? People say a religion, right? Hoodoo is not that, right? It is a spiritual practice, but you don't naturally always hear about initiations. You hear about teachers. You might have somebody teaching you, right? Instructing you in that way. But as far as picking it up and going with it, you can run with the hoodoo. The voodoo, you're going to have to be initiated. They're going to be things that you got to go through, right? There's a lot more things that you, in terms of that teacher student, kind of thing. But with the hoodoo, a lot of it is things that we heard in our own families, right? They might not have called it hoodoo, but there are a lot of things that we hear our grandmothers and our grandfathers do or not do, and they will remind us not to do. I know growing up in New Orleans, the shotgun houses, right? We were always reminded, don't let somebody come through the front door and leave out the back, right? And other places of the country, people go, what? Out your back door. But you know what I'm saying? But people would do things like that. And they would try to, what my mother and my grandmother would say is cross you, right? Drop something in your house to cause sickness, to cause death, to cause animosity between the husband and wife or whatever, the children and their parents, front door, leaving out the back because they don't want to cross their medicine, what they've left in your home. So things like that people might say, oh, wasn't that hoodoo? They might say, girl, don't you be talking about that? But it was things that we understood to be those things. So it is something that is more, doesn't require that initiation, but it does require that understanding, right? And that willingness to listen. But voodoo, you're going to have to be initiated. There are a lot more lessons to that information and a lot more tutelage, that goes with it.
You just said something that I just understood it for the first time ever, right? A
Mm-hmm.
person might say in passing, man, they try to throw a cross at me.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
they try to put me in a cross.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
never literally knew what they meant whenever they would say that kind of a
Right,
phrase.
right,
You just
right.
you just unlocked it just now.
Yeah. And like I say, growing up in New Orleans, we heard that often, and you would think about and they would give instances. I remember my mother would say she remembers somebody coming to the house. She was a little girl playing, with her doll, and remember somebody coming over there, supposed to be a friend of the family. Oh, I just came to see, but they knew that the person wasn't home, right? Oh, I just came to see such and such, and then they tried to leave. Then one went out the back, and then somebody else came in and they had a seizure. And then they were like, well, what happened? And she relayed the story, and they said that they knew that this person had did something, right? So yeah, it's things like that, and that cross, and they wouldn't go back and say, well, why didn't they just leave? Because they didn't want to cross their own medicine, right? They didn't want to cross what they left. So yeah. So those are things that, like I say, you don't have to really you understand from being taught, right, talked about over and over again, reiterated, but the language of it is much different than when we talk about voodoo. Now we're talking about sitting there and really studying, right? It's kind of like a master class, right, in it, right, as opposed to hoodoo. It's kind of like we learn on the fly. Don't do that, do this, kind of thing.
Uh, let's go to the religious side of this, right? Because there's always we in
Yeah,
the South once again,
yeah.
the religious pushback. It's amazing to me in all of your prescriptions how many Bible verses are in the prescription.
Right.
So let's
Well,
talk about that. In the back of the book, in the appendix, you have
yeah,
all the Psalms
yeah,
listed.
yeah,
So think
yeah.
about that, please.
Okay. So my grandfather would always talk about reverse engineering, right? And so we understand that Christianity was put upon us, right, to subjugate us, to keep us, understanding that we should not be doing our African thing, right? That African thing is going to make us recognize and realize our enslavement, right? It's going to give us too much power. And so with that power, we're going to fight against what's happening to us. Under the idea of Christianity, the early enslaved people were taught that this is the thing that needs to happen to you because you're not acting like a civilized person, basically. So this is your fate, right? And so there were slave Bibles where parts of the Bible were extracted, right? Anything that might have dealt with freedom or anything like that the white people thought would give you some kind of onus to want to get out of this subjugate this enslavement, they took out and they gave you what they wanted to give you. And so for a long period in time, they would even sit in on the services that the enslaved people had, and even out of enslavement during Jim Crow, sit in the back of the church to make sure that you weren't teaching or preaching anything that might give people the idea that they're being mistreated, right? So my grandfather said that taking those words, right, and creating spell work out of those words, it reinforces now in our mouths, the people that you enslave, it becomes a bullet that's shooting out our mouths. And I say to people, it's like if somebody broke in your house and they dropped their gun, are you gonna pick it up and give it to them? You know what I'm saying? No, you're going to pick it up and use it on them, right? And so that's what we're doing with these words. So we're taking the words that they gave us that they thought was going to keep us docile, and now we're using them as a weapon. We're weaponizing their words. So that's why they're there. It's saying, okay, yeah, yeah, I hear what you're saying. You thought you was doing one thing, but now we're doing something else with it. And they don't like that. They don't want that. What are you doing? Why? So when you use those words in that way with the rituals, then it becomes powerful. It becomes powerful magic.
You mentioned your grandfather a few times tonight in this interview, and my grandfather is very, very key in my life. He just passed last year around this time, to commemorate him, give
Mm-hmm,
respect to the ancestors. But
mm-hmm.
you mentioned in the back of the book being a little girl watching your grandfather and his whole setup he had and everything. Tell us about how influential your grandfather was on you, and take us back to those days as a little girl, if you can, and
Yeah,
what that was
yeah.
like for you.
Yeah, well, both grandfathers. My mother's father, he was the one who always talked about the reverse engineering. On my father's side, my grandfather Honduran, right? And so he, the whole abatala, the whole practice of Ifa and doing for the community, right? But also understanding that you need to be protected. My mother said she would always tell this story. He liked to take them out to go listen to music, right? And so he would take, everybody out. And so there was this little Cuban, kind of like a Cuban restaurant, a little bar right on the corner. And he would like to go listen to the music there. And so one day, this guy, he was in there. He's like, I don't want, he didn't want the black folk in there. And he was like, no, they're coming in. They're coming in because they're with me because that's my family, sort of thing, right? And so there was this big humbug. And so he goes home and he says, okay, I got something for them. I'm going to do some altar work. Tomorrow night, we're going right back there. You know what I'm saying? And so they went back the next night, no problem, So he was always about using what you have to get what you need to get, but also about protecting people. He could have went in on his own. He's fair-skinned man, right? They would have let him in, but he's saying, no, this is a communal thing. You know what I'm saying? We're not the enemy. We're not each other's enemy. And so we create these scenarios where we think that the enemy is black and brown people, indigenous people, when we're not the ones making these laws against us, while they sit back and laugh at us fighting each other, and they keep creating more legislation to keep us subjugated, right? And so, yeah, so for me, my grandfathers were very vocal. My mother's father, he was always talking about being a young boy and meeting Marcus Garvey, right? And so from an early age, he was a Garveyite, right? And so he would always talk about Marcus Garvey and his father taking him to meet Marcus Garvey and being able to see Marcus Garvey when they carted him away in the New Orleans area, right? And they took him away, and although he said there
Yeah,
were like thousands of people there
yeah,
singing and
that's
crying,
powerful, man.
and yeah, and
Powerful.
he said I can remember bawling like a baby. You know what I'm saying? So he would always tell us that's the America that he knows, right? That's the America that he remembers, taking this great man away. And so I try to embody that. That's why I put his picture when I'm writing. I put his picture there. I want him to see, the legacy that he's left behind, because he's passed on as well. But I want him to be a part of this work, right? I want him to bless this work. I want him to see that I'm still working, for him, right?
And I mentioned that Queen Mother Moore book a few months ago. I did that interview,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a chapter in the book about that particular time whenever Marcus Garvey came to New
Yes,
Orleans, and
yes,
that whole uprising about that. That's a
yes,
whole chapter in that particular book.
yes, yes.
Yeah. So I love discussing craft and writing on this show. A lot of writers watch this show. So when it comes to you being in the MFA program, right?
Uh-huh. Mhm.
A lot of us haven't gone through that particular school. So, what did you learn? You would say that really helped you now from those MFA days and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What still carries through to today? You would say.
One of the things for me is that what I would say that I learned and that I would encourage other people, especially Southern writers, is to really hone in on your stories, right? Don't feel like your stories don't have a place. Because I know from when I went to the UNO and I was in that program, there weren't a lot of African American people that had gone through that program, right? And I remember one of the sisters who I was really good friends with, because we were all, not a lot of us, so we all know each other, right? And she was saying, she just had a bad experience in the program. She dropped out of the program. She was like, Mawiyah, they on some shit, And so I remember getting accepted, and I remember going there and writing about just my own life, my own purpose, and being black and growing up, and and it was always these ideas of, I don't believe that, or can you prove that? I remember writing this piece about this director who had stayed in this bed and breakfast that I worked at, right? I was there with my mom, working there with my mom. And he was there with his daughter because they were working on a film. He's a famous white guy, but anyhow, they were working on a film, and instead of like leaving the tip, right, he threw the tip behind the toilet and peed on it, right? Yeah, yeah. So, and I remember I wrote about that, right? And I remember the teacher really like it, let everybody go around. We would sit around the table and everybody would go around and share their piece that they had worked on for that week. And the one of the guys, he was in there and he's like, I don't believe that. Why would he do that? And just yeah. And so, and I'm like, listen, this is my truth. You were not there, so you do not know what happened. And I just remember having to defend the story. And I remember the professor not saying anything, right? And then afterwards, because the class was probably about an hour, we probably spent 45 minutes of that hour arguing about my piece, right? And I remember the professor saying, if you're going to include that in your thesis, right, for your MFA, you probably want to change it because it's not believable, right? And I remember saying, oh, no, it's not. So I'm not changing it because this did happen, right? It happened the way it happened. And, for clarity, we could call my mom up. She can come down here if that's what you want, but I'm not changing the piece, right? So, I would tell people and I didn't change it. It stayed. And it was a battle, to defend it, but I defended it and got the MFA. But I would just tell people to stick to your stories. If it's your story, really be a part of it. I wanted everything that was in my thesis to speak to my culture. You know what I'm saying? So I wrote about all of those times, the time there, that time. And this particular this man, I remember him saying, when after we had finished cleaning the room and all that, we left the money. My mom was like, we ain't picking that up, And so I remember him saying, he left some money for the negresses. Yeah. And I remember that was the last line of the work that I had. And so I just remember defending that. And I remember saying that whatever I write, I'm going to showcase it the way it is, just the way it is, And so, yeah. Just use your language, tell your stories. Don't think that your stories don't have a place. That's what I learned. And to just be honest about it and stand firm in it. Don't back down. It's your story, tell it. Even creating this book, people were like, well, first of all, with the first book, they were like, do Black people buy books? Because I guess the idea is that we just go on the internet and try to get a free PDF or something like that. So that was an issue, right? And I said, yeah, they'll we do the book, they're gonna buy it. And so then with this one, it was kind of like, well, are they really going to support a hoodoo book that's written by a Black person? Because you got all these white people who are writing hoodoo books, right? And creating AI to make it look like it's a Black woman, but it's not a Black woman. I found lots of those. You can't find this woman nowhere in the world, but she's been looking the same for 20 years. You know what I'm saying? And so it's a white person creating it. And so, but everywhere I've gone and I've talked, people are saying, we want this book. We need this book. This is a book I wish I had when I was younger. This is a book I'm sharing with my kid, so it's just to tell your story. That's what I would tell people. Don't back down from your story. It's going to be a fight, you know what I'm saying? But don't back down from telling your story.
Because even beyond the MFA program, when it comes to the business of books, you mentioned your agent earlier in the conversation.
Yeah, yes.
Do you face like a lot of pushback when you propose your books and the nature of them? You experience levels of pushback, like, we don't know about this, and we don't know about.
I did. I think the first book came out around the time of the pandemic, right? And so you had a lot of Black people who were saying we don't see ourselves oftentimes. And when we look at, especially when you look at magical books and things like that, we have to get white books and kind of piece this and that, see if that works for us. Or you get Black people who are afraid to talk to Black people, right? And so they want to be like, I'm talking to everybody. I'm not really, So, you didn't have a lot of that. You didn't have a lot of for us. But then you had a lot of people who were trying to be politically correct, a lot of publishing houses. And so they were looking for more Black voices. So then it got to be opened up, right? So there had been a time where I was really pitching, right? And it wasn't anything. But then, after George Floyd, it started to be like, hey, we're looking over here, kind of thing. And you would make a statement on Twitter, or you would say something on Facebook, and they would go, hey, do you write? And I'm like, I've been here all this time, you never, yeah, So then it became a little bit easier. Now, when I had the idea for this book, which a portion of it was in the first book, they were like, well, that's a bit long. And so when I had this idea, they were like, oh, well, people like that first book. Let's do it. So then it became easier. So, I knew that I wanted to talk to people, especially with all of this stuff that we're dealing with. And then I had a lot more clients that were still coming, and they were like, I got fired from my job. I'm doing this. I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to start up my own business. And, I'm trying to be inclusive, but these white people are coming in, trying to take my business, trying to co-opt what I'm doing. And so there was a lot more that needed to be said. And so that's why this book was born, from those ideas. And then when we think about, how we venerate our ancestors, right? Usually it's when we're pouring libation, or maybe during Black History Month. But I thought we need to be doing that all the time. We need to be pulling on those people energy. In my classroom, I have a big picture of James Baldwin. Right, my daughter did. She hand drew it, right, and I keep it. That's my James Baldwin shrine to remind me about my voice, the power of your voice, right? And so understanding that we still need that energy, we still need to have it, and to be able to rely on it. So yeah, it was hard, it was difficult at first. Then people started kind of looking for it, but I see it going back to that now, especially with our current administration, right? I see we're going to still have that fight again, because there were some things that I still wanted to do, and people were like, I don't know. So it's still going to be a battle, right? And my husband and I, we always talk about that. And he's like, well, then we're gonna put it out ourselves if they don't want it. That's what we're gonna do, right? So
That's what I was thinking.
we've done that. We've done that before, right?
That's what
So
I was thinking. Yeah.
right. That's not a stopping point for me. You're not gonna silence me with that. So yeah, it's a fight. It's always going to be a fight, whether it's a literary fight, a physical fight, whatever, it's going to still be a fight, and it's something that you just have to get up for. If you have the words and you want to say what it is that needs to be heard, then don't let anybody, hold you back and stop you from saying it. So yeah, that's the way we see it progressing.
Okay, two last, we'll round up, two last questions, right? In the very back of your book, this book is full of tools and instruments. Like anybody watching this podcast, it's full of a lot of things. In the back of the book, you have a recommended reading list. You have reading practices for study groups and everything. Yeah. And you mentioned being an educator earlier, so I can see why you had that now. But why was it important for you to have those things in the book for you as a writer? Why was that important?
Right. Well, one of the things my husband would always talk about, started off when we got married, getting a lot of the books that he got from Hakeem Abudi. He had a book list in his book, right? And so for me, I always felt like, just like writing this book, writing the first book, there was a lot of information that I researched, and a lot of places that I went to get information that I know a lot of people, they're not really gravitating toward today, right? Especially a lot of the older books, right? And so I wanted to have a book list that shaped me, right? Shaped my story, shaped who I am and who I'm still, evolving into being. And so that's why I put the book list back there, because I thought, I was talking to a young man who's a student. He's working on his PhD, and he bought the book in New Orleans, and he was like, the book list, he mentioned the book list. And I said, yeah, just take one of the books, and have it, work it with your group. You don't have to pull out a whole bunch of them. Take one at a time, work on that. And he was talking about using it in their fight for activism on campus, and this, how he works. And I said, yeah, that's why it's there, just to give us that extra push, to that knowledge about different things, because our spirituality is deeply rooted in our culture. It's not separate from it, right? And it should never be separate from it. So those historical information, reading about Asada, that's important to us. That's why she's back there. All of these different, the psychology of how we see ourselves, when we think about this, coming out of enslavement, but still having that DNA, right? The DNA within us of our ancestors that sometimes we cling up when we're in certain places. Under that knowledge, we still need to have that. So it was important to me to include that, because I want people to see also that it doesn't stop once you finish the last story, or once you finish the last work. there's still much more to do, right? And that much more is reading from that list.
My last closeout question for tonight is very important, man.
Mm-hmm.
The sister Anna Douglas, right? Anna Douglas, Frederick Douglass's wife,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we
Mm-hmm.
have right now the sister Jasmine Crockett right now in Texas. She's
Mm-hmm.
going up. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
backlash going back and forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Think about who Anna Douglas was to Frederick Douglass, how important she was to everything he was able to do ultimately.
Right, right,
And of
right,
course, the black women always getting, I want to say, erased or pushed to the
right,
back
right.
historically.
Right.
Think about
You
that.
know, when I talked about Anna Douglas, it was because I had earlier for a while I had been talking to sisters, right? And whenever people would talk about Frederick Douglass, we would always say about his greatness, right? We didn't want to take anything away from who Frederick Douglass was, but then we would always talk about what nobody mentions Anna, right? And then in certain circles, I remember there was a brother. He was like, well, he had this white women. They helped him, and they did this and they did that for him. But Anna, because of Anna Douglas, and her sewing and her being able to make him this sailor suit and all this stuff she did for him to help him to be able to leave and to be able to do all of these speeches and just the background she took to make sure she took care of the kids, the home, and all of this to give him the wherewithal to be able to make those trips and to be this orator, to be this person that we know of as Frederick Douglass. And so the part of it about her daughter saying, that my mom did these things. My mom was there, and just to understand that she had to hold her tongue, right? He's getting his money from these benefactors, white women, and these white women are in your space calling you ugly and stupid and all this, and you have common sense to hear that what they're saying, but she understands the bigger picture is I'm trying to help Frederick. If I speak up, right, this is not going to work. It's not going to work for me, for the kids, for none of us. It's going to work. And so we don't hear enough of that. We always hear about what he did, which is great and wonderful. And I love Frederick Douglass, but we have to honor the person who also allowed him to be able to make those movements and to do those things. So in writing about Sandy Jenkins and giving him the root, right, I have to also honor Anna Douglass, right? And so, yeah, Jasmine Crockett, oftentimes when Black women speak up, we're labeled as being loudmouths, right? You're talking too much. You're sapphire. You got all this to say. Nobody wants to see it. Can you shake your butt? That's all we want to see. And it's not. We're not treated as being people who need to be respected. I remember Condoleezza Rice in the article was talking about when she was in college how the guys I guess it was the white guys, how they could bounce quarters off her butt. I mean, really, Dr. Rice, really? So how do we change that narrative? And so it was important to add her in there because she sat on my soul, her that energy, like I said earlier about divining to see what to say. And when I divined about including Sandy Jenkins, it was said that I needed to include Frederick, but I needed to include Anna. Her voice, it should not be diminished. And so it was important to lay the framework for this woman who created this outfit to disguise him so that he could be able to move forward, right? She could sew and she did it and made it look like this dude was up in the military. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, we can't do that. And we have to remember all of the torment she took from these white women, right? And when Black women think about being in solidarity with white women who only want solidarity as it benefits them and not to benefit us, take you away from Black men so that you can help us, but they ain't leaving white men. They ain't leaving them behind. So you know what I'm saying? So we need to understand that. That's why Angela Davis is in the book list, right? Because she talks about all of those things. That's why I say, the work, it goes in, it fits in tandem with the knowledge, right? Our history, our story, our spirituality is tied deeply to our story. And so we can't forget that. And anybody who's, if your religious leader or your spiritual leader says that it should be separate, then you need to find a new leader because they're not leading you anywhere.
Man, thank you very, very much for this
Thank you for having
full-length
me.
interview, man. This has been great. It's been everything I hoped for. Anybody watching this in the future, man, leave your comments in the chat. We'll answer back as soon as we can. Share it, like it, subscribe to the channel. A lot more shows already filling up for next year. I got shows getting booked for February already next year, man. So subscribe to the show. A lot more coming. And thank y'all very, very much for the Sean P experience, man. Thank you very much. Have a good
Thank you.
Friday.
Bye bye.